Donzaleigh Abernathy, the daughter of the late civil rights activist Reverend Ralph Abernathy, delivered a keynote speech at MATC's celebration held in honor of her godfather, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. She spoke about her father and godfather, reflecting on their pivotal roles in the inception of the civil rights movement.
Those are my guys. That's my daddy, and that's Uncle Martin. Yeah, my dad was a soldier, and he graduated from high school when he was 16. Uncle Martin graduated when he was 15, and Daddy was drafted into the war and developed rheumatic fever when they were in the European theater. And David was his real name. He just signed in as Ralph when he was enrolled. And what happened was because he developed rheumatic fever when they were leaving France and went to England, they put him in the hospital there in England, and they shipped the rest of the black soldiers off to the islands off of the coast of Japan where everybody was killed. My dad said that they died defending American democracy, yet would have been denied the right to come back to the United States of America and enjoy that same democracy that they had fought and died for. And because my dad survived and one of the soldiers survived, he had something called survivor's remorse, the same thing he would have when he lost Uncle Martin. And therefore, he decided to dedicate his life to a noble cause. So that's Daddy being a pastor, Uncle Martin being a pastor. And they believed that they were called by God to do something honorable in their lives, and they were. And this is Uncle Martin at Crozier Theological Cemetery, and there he is in the middle. And you see how he had this inner light inside of him. Some of us are average people, but Uncle Martin was sort of special. He had that something, so that when he would come into a room, you just automatically turned and you looked at him because of the way he was. And he wasn't trying to be, famous or great or anything. In his world, he would have been a philosopher and a teacher of philosophy. But when God calls you, you have to answer. And then all of a sudden, he and Daddy are reconnected in Montgomery, Alabama, and I can't tell you that story, but Dr. Vernon Johns, the pastor of Dexter Avenue, brought them all together. And Dr. Johns was telling Uncle Martin what he wasn't ready for, but because it was the days of segregation, Uncle Martin had driven Dr. Johns, and so he drove into my parents' house, and Uncle Martin came up the walk. And my dad said he looked out and he saw in the light, he's like, oh my God, Martin, my friend, has come to my door. And they came in and they sat down and they broke bread because my mother made an incredible, food, because that's what my mother could do. And they talked about the crisis of the Negroes in Montgomery, Alabama. And then the following morning, Uncle Martin was nervous, really nervous. And he called my dad, who was the first black pastor on the radio, first black man on the radio. And Uncle Martin said, I'm scared. And Daddy said, now listen, what I need you to do, I need you to get down on your knees. And I'm going to get down on my knees. And we're going to pray. And my dad could pray. And that's what he did. He prayed and he prayed and he lifted Uncle Martin up. He said, now I need you to go forward and get accepted as the pastor of Dexter Avenue. Now, simultaneously, Dr. Johns, the former pastor, was preaching that morning at my dad's church at First Baptist, and Dr. Johns was my dad's mentor. But Dr. Johns was an old man, and Daddy wanted Uncle Martin, and he gave him what he needed to do. And even though the majority of the members were over at First Baptist to hear Dr. Johns, Uncle Martin was so on fire, they offered it to him, and he accepted it. And when I was a little girl, Cesar Chavez was my dad's friend. He was Uncle Martin's friend. My dad said to me, Donzaleigh, I need you to give up your most favorite food, which are grapes. And so I said, why? He said, for Latino people, because they're being mistreated, and they're our people, Donzaleigh. And so I said, okay. And I gave up my grapes when I was a little girl. And I didn't eat grapes again until I was close to 40 years of age, because the Latino people weren't being treated fairly, and they weren't getting a fair amount of money working in the fields, because I don't know if you all understand, but in California, we feed America. We give you all of your fresh produce. Maybe you can get your potatoes from Idaho and you can get your oranges from Florida, but the rest of everything else you're going to get from California. That's the world that I grew up in. This is the bus. And it was colored seating from the back. And Rosa was arrested, and Rosa was the secretary of Montgomery NAACP. And my dad was the number 2 man at the NAACP. And E.D. Nixon had to go out of town. He was a Pullman porter. You all know what the Pullman porters were. The older people do. Young people, you all don't know. He's that person that you greet when you're getting on the train. He takes your luggage and directs you to your seat. That's the Pullman porter, and E.D. Nixon was the head of that. Just Asa Philip Randolph, who's responsible for the March on Washington, he was a Pullman porter as well. Anyway, so he had to go out of town. And so he said, Ralph, we got to do something. And my dad said, okay. And this would be my dad's third boycott. And he said to my dad said to E.D. Nixon, do me a favor, I need you to call my friend Martin, who's new in town. And before he could call, Daddy called, and Uncle Martin said, I can't do anything. I'm doing my dissertation. And Daddy's like, no. You're going to come with me. I'll pick you up. You're going to go to these meetings. And so Uncle Martin said, and it wasn't until that third mass meeting that Uncle Martin officially joined them. The following morning, just so you all understand, after Rosa was arrested on December 2nd, my dad issued the call for the creation of the civil rights movement, and that was before the Baptist ministers. And that's a great thing about being a Baptist versus a Methodist. When you're a Methodist, when you're a Baptist, you can run your church. You can do what you need to do. When you're a Methodist, you got to go through the bishop, right? And so they were Baptist ministers, and they was like, this is what we need to do. But it was the women, Joanne Robinson, and the teachers. And my dad at that point had been the dean, he was the outgoing dean of men at Alabama State University, because my dad thought that he was going to spend his whole life in the educational system. But God intervened. And Uncle Martin said these words, there comes a time when people get tired of being trampled over by the iron feet of oppression. There comes a time when people get tired of being pushed out of the glittering sunlight of life's July and are left standing in the piercing chill of an alpine November. You all know what an alpine November is because you live in an alpine November. Work and fight until justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. And with those words, black people took to the streets. 50,000 black people took to the streets for the first time in the history of the United States of America. And just so you understand, like Michelle Obama said, I live in a house that was built by slaves, and I know that they may try and take down part of the East Wing, but the rest of the sucker was built by the hands of my ancestors, black people, slaves. So yes, we've come a long way. Anyway, that's them, Daddy and Uncle Martin and Baird Rustin, who came down and introduced the idea. And the horrible thing about that is they had to have him leave. The black ministers said he had to leave because he was, openly homosexual. And I think it's wrong to discriminate with somebody because of their the way that God made them. It's not something that you study and decide you're going to be that way. You come into the world that way, and that's just the way you are. And I don't want somebody to love somebody because I think they have to love a certain way. I think they need to be who they are. That's what Daddy and Uncle Martin taught me. Anyway, that's Daddy, and that's him overseeing a crowd. And that's standing room only there, and there you'll see those are women. When you look at that photograph, those are women. Women were the facilitators of change in America, not the men. The black men were scared, but the women were fearless. And women are still fearless, yes. And so we were hungry. We had endured 244 years of slavery, nearly 100 years of Jim Crow segregation. That was 344 years of a white man telling you you're less than simply because of the color of your skin. And don't you know, God made us that way. And this is the beautiful thing that I love about growing up with Uncle Martin and Daddy. And the thing that they taught us was that, while my sister's husband his ancestors were living in caves wearing the hide of a bear on their backs, because that's what they were up there in Denmark. My people had built the pyramids. We had hieroglyphics. We had running water. We knew the power. We knew gold. We had created. We even took our knowledge, the Moors, to Spain and built where your ancestors were and made Spain beautiful. Black people did that. We didn't learn a skill out of slavery. We already had skills long before.
You can see her full keynote address on the Milwaukee PBS website. You can also see the full Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration on MATC's website.